Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us at today's program featuring artist and educator Jodie Cavalier, presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition. Home Edition is a series of curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. My name is Rebecca Trawick, and I serve as the director and curator of the Wignall Museum at Chaffey College. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. We want to take a moment to recognize that we are situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our recognition and respect to the elders, both past, present, and future.
And hello, my name is Roman Stallenwerk. I am assistant curator at the Wignall Museum. Please visit us at www.chaffey.edu/Wignall to access our full schedule of programs and available recordings. When possible, recordings are made available on our website. Announcements posted to our email subscribers and social media when new videos are available. You can follow us on social media, including Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Wignall Museum. Visit our website About Us page to sign up to receive email announcements. And we also ask that you complete a brief survey after the session at tinyurl.com/Wignall Spring 21 Visitor Survey. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Hadel. I am the preparator at the museum. I'll be assisting Rebecca and Roman with today's Zoom session. In a moment, Jodie Cavalier will present for about a half an hour or so, with the remaining time being available for Q&A.
Thanks, Roman and Andy. Today I have the honor of introducing our guest artist, Jodie Cavalier. Jodie is a project-based artist working with residuals of daily life, objects, food, and language. Cavalier earned her BA from the University of California, Berkeley, and MFA from Pacific Northwest College of Art, Portland, Oregon. Cavalier has participated in residencies including the Center for Land Use Interpretation, Passaic, AZ West Wagon Encampment, and ANCA. Her work has been exhibited at museums across the Pacific Northwest and California, Chicago, New York, and Frankfurt. Jodie grew up in the Inland Empire and is a graduate of Chaffey College. She participated in the Student Invitational Honors Course and exhibition in 2008. We're thrilled to have Jodie return to the college virtually to share about her studio practice. So please join me in giving Jodie a warm virtual welcome to Home Edition. Welcome, Jodie, and thank you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back here at Chaffey. It feels really full circle for me. I really thought a lot about the type of work I wanted to share when Rebecca asked me to do this. And I make a lot of different types of things and have been working on a lot of different types of projects. But I really kept coming back to thinking about language as a type of material and thinking about some of the projects that I had really been focusing on and still working on, and thinking about this last year and how it has shifted our lives and how these moments are really fleeting. Everything is kind of fleeting. And even before we let folks into this presentation room, we were talking about time and how time is very much a construct, and how we are following a different type of time now. And so I'm really thinking about my artwork that I'm about to show you as being the kind of ephemeral kind of qualities at place, and then also the artwork itself is the intangible moments. And so there's going to be a lot of text, and I'll read some of that, and there's going to be some work that is a little bit hard to categorize. I wanted to start out with this first image because this is actually one of the works that reconnected Rebecca and I. This piece was supposed to be in a show right before the pandemic hit the US and closure started to happen. The exhibition kind of got postponed and inevitably kind of canceled, or we don't know what, but this piece was a real turning point for me in my practice. It was one of the pieces that overtly addressed my interest in food, food justice, and my cultural heritage, and then also a more traditional kind of art practice. So I was able to create this work while I was in residency at a place in Portland called the Working Library, where I was able to learn letterpress printing. And so this is part of an edition of hand letterpress prints. And the language itself came actually pretty naturally and all at once. It was included in a small zine, and there was a point in which I realized it was a lot more powerful than I initially expected when I put it in the zine, and I wanted to kind of take that out and let it have its own life. And so I made this print, which is kind of stylized to be a kind of wanted poster format, but then through this repetition of language and somewhat of humor, you start to really understand the complexities of what is being said, which is that it's more than just about food and eating. It's about life. It's about healing. It's about so many other things in our life. And so after this piece, I was really leaning into using language a lot more and using a kind of more direct, poetic, I guess, in my work. I was always interested in a kind of poetic approach in my art making, but never really using language in this way. And so I really, like I said, leaned into that and started to make more of this type of work. So this is one of many pieces that are essentially menus. And so I collaborated with an artist here in Portland who is actually one of my graduate advisors. Her name is MK Guth, and we worked on a series of menus. And so we wanted to take clues and cues from restaurant and dining experiences and use those in the work. And that was kind of the starting point. And so we made a series of these menus, and this one in particular is one of my favorites of the series. I was thinking about it being a kind of like Gothic style, maybe something that you would see in a funeral home with a cross between like a fancy steakhouse or something. And so I was really like grabbing these different kinds of inspirations and created this piece. It's called Preservation, and I was thinking about a kind of preservation of self through loss and the kind of transformation that happens, but also thinking about food more directly, and was researching a lot of methods of preserving food. And so there's a transformation that definitely happens there too, where the food almost can almost go rotten and then turn and be preserved in this way. So the text itself on the right side that you see, I'll read that. It's broken up into courses, again, to mimic that kind of menu. So there's a first course, second course, third course, and then a suite. And it says, I have nothing against life. I watch as time has bruised the flesh. Taste it go odd. Never dead, but resurrected. Nothing is stronger than what rises up from the ashes. And so again, thinking about the different ways that even just the term preservation can mean, and also subversing it, similarly with the first piece, like thinking about the repetition of I want food, and then at a certain point as you're reading through it, it kind of changes. And this piece was part of a project, like I said, that was a collaboration. We created these menus. They were exhibited pretty traditionally in a gallery. There were some dining tables which you could grab the menu and kind of spend more time with it. But the gallery gave us an opportunity to have a dinner, basically, to host a dinner. And so in true fashion, my collaborator and I wanted to complicate this dinner process. And so we secured an off-site location, and we wanted to think about, again, breaking apart what the dining experience is. And we decided that we wanted to have a multi-course dinner, but each course would be at a different site on this old camp property. And so we moved with our dinner guests to each different location and had a bite to eat, and then ended up all in one location at the end for the main course. And so this piece, like I said, there was a text that was kind of read at each site, and then a little bite of food, and then they were kind of related, and we talked about those things before moving on to the next one. I wanted to read, excuse me, an excerpt from that project. I suppose I'll read 2 excerpts, but we'll start off with this one. So this is a kind of zoomed in map of the property. And then there's an image on the left there of me in the middle of reciting what I will share with you now. But this particular spot in the project, I'm talking about water. And so we were thinking about the elements that were present in this location. So I'll read you a short excerpt from this particular section. There are 2 creeks that run through this property. They are known today as Bee Creek and Canyon Creek. They intersect over there. The water that fills this small lake is from Bee Creek. At one time, there were a number of native salmon fish that made their home in this creek. They are no longer there. Maybe they will return. Maybe something else will take their place. The creeks keep moving, and they are never still. Close your eyes. I like to imagine those fish as ghosts. And if those ghost fish were light, this whole lake would glow and illuminate everything in the dark, everything down there in the water, and everything around us up here in the air. We would see everything differently. Imagine seeing everything differently than how we see it now. You can open your eyes. This is another site on the property. And this particular location, I was really drawn to, well, the name of this location on the property is called Cedar Circle, and there's a bunch of cedar trees that kind of make this opening in this kind of really lush and densely populated with trees area. And so I knew that I wanted to write about the trees in some fashion. And at that time, I was also doing a lot of research on Mexican healing practices. And so it really was a kind of nice moment where I could insert some of my research and also talk about the actual kind of ingredient or material that was present, like or surrounding us. And so I'll read you an excerpt from this particular location, and then this is the last I'll share of this project, but it definitely starts to feed into a lot of the other projects. All right. Cedar bark was once used in the production of rope, mats, and basketry, often combined with other elements of the cedar, such as limbs, roots, boughs, used for strength or decoration. In the past, cedar bark was the main material used in the production of clothing for the Stolo people in British Columbia and other tribes in the Pacific Northwest, which is where this took place, which is where I live. After the bark was peeled into long strips from the trees, the outer layer was split away and the flexible inner layer was shredded and processed. The resulting felted strips of bark were soft and could be sewn or woven into a variety of fabrics. Excuse me. My great aunt practiced Mexican healing methods. She passed away a few years ago. There's an ailment in Mexican culture that's not easily translated into English. Susto is what it's called. It's something you can see in a person and maybe have felt, but there's no language, no words to fully describe it. It's not recognized in Western medicine. Susto is a loss of spirit, a loss of soul, a magical fright, a trauma. The children held in detention centers at the border, they can't remember their own mothers. This is susto. A ritual using cedar is used to help cure susto. Bark and branches are gathered to make a broom. The cedar broom is used on the body as if to sweep the susto away from the surface. The cedar tree is generous. Maybe learn from the generosity of these kinds of trees. So this next project, I was invited to meet the curatorial committee at a middle school here in Portland. And it's a project, a social practice project, a contemporary art museum housed inside the middle school, and it's called KSMOCA, King School Museum of Contemporary Art. And the curatorial committee is made up of fourth graders and fifth graders, I think. And the group invited me in with their advisor, Roz Cruz, who's pictured here in the kind of center of the image. And I showed them a bunch of my work, and they decide, one, if they're going to show my work in their school, in their museum, excuse me, and two, which of the works they might want to show. So we met on a Thursday, which is pizza day, in the cafeteria, and we all got our pizzas and went back to the room and kind of were looking at my work, and I was talking about the work I was making, and in particular a lot of the work that was more print based, and then some of the work that was around these Mexican rituals that I was researching at the time. And so they were really drawn to these rituals and had all kinds of experiences of their own to share about family rituals and different things that they would do in their own culture. And they were really jazzed about me bringing in these series of hand brooms. And so they knew they wanted to have that be part of the piece. And so instead of just having them select works and me and installing these pieces, I decided that maybe we should collaborate on the piece together. And so that's what we did for a series of a couple of months. I went to the school on Pizza Thursdays, and we met and we talked about the work that we were making together. So it started out from the broom itself and the idea of this ritual. And I asked the students, what were the things that kind of ailed them, or what were the things that worried them? And they began to share those experiences with me and those things that they were thinking about. And I used that text to create this line drawing that referenced the broom. And so what you see next to the broom are two prints, one framed more traditionally, and the other one in this this kind of spiral bound format where students could rip off a copy of the print and take it home if they wanted to. So they were really interested in the kind of interactive qualities of my work. So I wanted to make sure that those were also present and included. And so so the text itself has, like I said, the responses to their questions, what worries them. So they were talking about really intense subject matter, actually. Family members getting sick, friends moving away, doing good in school. They talked about gun violence and mass shootings in schools and all types of things that we might not think children are processing, but they were readily available to talk about and share. And so it was a really wonderful and powerful piece that we worked on together. Here's a kind of closer up of the takeaway print. So you can see the text that turns into the line drawing. And they helped me choose the colors and all of that as well. Very collaborative. So I have just a couple more things to share. Right before the pandemic hit, I was taking a self-publishing course and getting ready to publish a book of poetry and images, and I'm going to read a kind of excerpt from that. It's a project that I haven't continued to work on yet. I hope to, but my process is very long, and this past year has been particularly challenging on my creative practice, and I haven't been able to, I guess, mourn what's happening in the world and in my life. And I think once that happens, I might be able to work and kind of process more through some projects I have in mind. I have lots of projects that just kind of stopped. But here is one that, again, I intend to include in the publication, but I also am using as a kind of experimental presentation, or like in a performative way, which is why you see this lovely image of water. All right. I have a project I can't get out of my head. I think about it all of the time. But the real issue is that it refuses to move from my head to paper, and from paper back to the earth. It's a hill in the middle of the ocean, my nephew says. It has water, or it has flowers and animals on it. The project is about islands, or a specific island, I'm not sure. How do I even write about an island, and why do I even care? I grew up in the Mojave Desert, flat, dry land as far as you can see, and as far as you can possibly imagine. The only water I saw were mirages. Can you see it? Do you see it too, my sister would say, as she knocked her fist against my arm. An optical phenomenon in which light rays bend to produce a displaced image of distant objects or the sky. The word comes from Mirari, meaning to look at, to wonder. This is the same root as for mirror and to admire. My grandmother is an island. I look at her from here, from my body, with admiration. My grandfather says, I know your grandmother is not well. She repeats things all the time. But I just gotta go with the flow, mija. I just gotta go with the flow. My grandmother is an island, the water washing away her memory. My grandmother is an island. And then this is the last piece I'll show. It is a piece I made this past year. The same gallery who invited me to work with my collaborator on those series of menus commissioned me to revisit this piece that was a version of one of the menus from before, but I made a different kind of version of it that really kind of referenced my life in that moment in mid-pandemic, almost about this time last year. And so it has that same kind of repeating quality. It's called Waiting For. And it always starts with waiting for something to happen, waiting for time to hold still, waiting for water to boil, waiting for the words to lose meaning, waiting for memories to fade, waiting for things to blow over, waiting to work again, waiting for wisdom, waiting for the struggle to end. And it goes on and on and on. And it's this combination of really mundane things that happen in our lives, like waiting for the laundry to dry, bumped up against things that are really happening in that moment, waiting for the election, waiting, for these moments of peace, especially during a time with so much upheaval and Portland being one of the city centers of resistance in the country. And so there were just, there was so much happening that it was hard not to get have these mundane things in your life get butt up against very, very serious things as well. So this was a kind of piece that reflected that. And that's what I have for you. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm recovering from a sinus infection.
Thank you, Jodie. I knew you were an artist who uses language and text, but now I see you're also a poet and writer. So thank you. A Menu for Waiting is so poignant in these times, particularly. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I loved that you talked about the KS MoCA program. I'm a huge fan of that program and love that the students, they do all the work themselves. They consist of the curatorial committee, and I just think it's brilliant. So I love that you were able to collaborate with them. And I love that you talked about, that you really approached it as a collaboration. But collaboration is one of these things that seems really mysterious and kind of magical to people. And so rarely do I hear discussions about what collaborations look like, what it means, what it constitutes a successful collaboration. So maybe you could talk about how you approached collaborations, and you could use KS MoCA as the sort of test case, or talk about any of the collaborations that you've done.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think I can say, coming from maybe a pretty large family, that that definitely, that's my nephew talking. That definitely has affected the way I think about collaboration. I think so much about art making is authorship, and with collaboration, I think you have to let a lot of that authorship go, and you have to think about the collaboration. At least for me, I can speak to my own collaboration and experiences, but for me, collaboration is more about that relationship than it is about the outcome. And so when I keep thinking about that and prioritizing that, then it helps me make decisions about what is best for that particular situation. Every collaboration is different, and then working with youth is very different than working and collaborating with adults. Yeah, with the KS MoCA crew, they had been working with artists for a while, and having KS MoCA be in their school for quite some time. And so they were already used to what relationships look like with artists from the outside. And so, I just leaned into what they were wanting and thinking, and that helped drive it. And they were, eager and open to hear what I had to say, but also had their own ideas as well. And so for me, it's just, you know, with KS Mocha also, I just feel really grateful that they invited me in. It's such a well-known project across the country. And even though there's seemingly a lot at stake, it also didn't feel like that. You know, it felt really comfortable, and it felt like we could do whatever we wanted to do, because they were always, you know, pushing up against the kind of rules. And so we just kind of went with it.
So you grew up in Inland Empire, and you're an alumni of Chaffey College. So I'm wondering if you have any advice for students who might be interested in a career in the arts, or are looking for or just have a future in the arts in general. I wonder if you had any advice for them.
It's funny because we were talking before folks entered the room, but I was saying that, you know, initially I wanted to go to culinary school before I went to college, and didn't go down that path. But then while I was in school, I studied so many different things, because I really didn't see a way that I could be an artist and maintain like a career doing that. Like I always knew that I would make art, but I didn't think that I could have a career doing that. And I was saying I didn't feel pressured by anyone. I just had that kind of thought in my head. And I kept taking art classes anyway, and I took a lot of other courses, which is the reason I think so much of my work is interdisciplinary, because it is influenced by, you know, psychology and sociology and all these other classes that I took over the years. And so my advice is like a long-winded response, but I guess my advice is that, you know, if you're continuing to take art classes, even though you don't think, you maybe you felt similarly, you didn't think that it was possible to have a career, you gotta maybe listen to yourself a little bit more and pursue that. But it isn't easy, obviously. And I had plenty of great faculty over the years give me statistics about, you know, about how many artists don't make it. And so, you know, the way that you can become successful is just continuing to talking to your faculty, really developing relationships with your teachers, and they're your community. And then being really engaged in any kind of other clubs or collectives, or any other extracurricular things that you can be a part of, because it's less hard when you're doing it together, when you're sharing resources, as I think a lot of folks have experienced this past year. You know, it takes working together. It takes a village to make things happen, and that's how I was able to kind of navigate through school and starting an art practice, and kind of really seeing it through. And it's also a lifelong thing. I think so many folks are eager to be successful at every kind of step of the way, and that's not realistic, and that's how you burn out. I think of my art practice as a lifelong practice, and you know, there's these moments that are punctuated where I have these great opportunities, and work with some amazing artists and get shown or whatever, but there's still a lot of life left. And so I'm not so worried, or I try not to get worried about who gets more attention, who's a younger artist with more accolades or what have you. I can only, worry about myself and do what I can do.
We've got a question from Evelyn. What does your creative process look like? Do you have a very specific way to go about ideas or projects?
My process is very research-based. I start with a set of ideas or concerns and really will go down a rabbit hole of just kind of researching and messing with, if it's a material or if there's a material that's related to the idea, then I might experiment with that. But excuse me, a lot of it is kind of wandering for a long period of time. I do spend a lot of time just thinking, which took me a long time to get used to, or to even be able to admit. I would spend time in the studio just like sitting on a couch, just kind of staring blankly off and trying to make sense of things in my head, where maybe other people might be sketching or something like that. But I'm really thinking about how I can envision a certain set of ideas being communicated. I also think a lot about how the work communicates to non-artists. And I think that influences a lot of the work that I make as well. So a lot of sitting around and doing nothing for a long time before I start to see kind of some of the things come together. I also usually like to do a kind of, I guess what you would maybe think of like as a mind map, and start to like group some of the ideas and materials together on paper, and then start to see how that might move things forward. Once I get into production, it's usually really fast, and that's because I have spent so much time already thinking about what it is I want to say and what materials I want to use.
Speaking about materials, a question from Kimberly in the chat. Do you have an overall media preference or process that has been your favorite to work with?
I do love sculpture. I didn't show any sculpture really in in this presentation. I think that part of that is just using your hands and building, and I do love that. But I don't think I have like a preference necessarily. A lot of the projects include a variety of media, and so I'm able to like kind of pick and choose things that I think are communicating the message. More recently, I've been working with printmaking, which I do enjoy. I enjoy the process of printmaking. But I also think some of that had to do with the fact that there was a period of time where I didn't have an artist studio. And so I was working and went to work at a print shop. And so that kind of influenced the work that I was making because I had access to a print shop. So yeah. I mean, I tend to enjoy all of the things that I work with. And for every project, it kind of just, it switches up. I really think about, what is it, that the project like for just going back to the KS Mocha that had, multiple interactive qualities. Started out with the broom. I knew I wanted to include the broom because the students were so drawn to it and they wanted to include the broom. And then so much of what we were doing was just talking. We were just, me and the youth were just having conversations about art, about different cultural healing practices and superstitions and different things. And so I knew that there had to be a sort of storytelling element. And so language just became like the way to do that. And so then that led to printmaking. And so I really just kind of like try to go back to the original idea and see what serves it.
So you talked about the value of research in your practice. It's sort of like the early stages, right? So research, experimentation, which all requires time, right? Can you talk about, you've had some really amazing residencies. Can you talk about how residencies fit into your practice and that research phase potentially?
I have had the opportunity to have some pretty cool residencies. I would say it took me some time to figure out how to use residencies to my advantage. The first couple residencies I went on, I overpacked and brought all these materials and had all these ideas and thought I was going to like make certain set of things. And then I realized now, and unless I have like a project or a deadline I'm working on, I usually don't bring that much anymore. And really, it for me is about the place that I'm going to, and really like being open and listening to that space and seeing if there's any crossover into the things I'm already interested in or thinking about. And it allows me the time to kind of see that work or those ideas from a different perspective. And so I think that's one of the main ways that the residencies have functioned for me. And then, I think about the location itself and what it has to offer. So the last residency I did was in February of last year. I went to Brighton, England, actually, and shot a lot of footage of the water there. My studio was actually on a large barge that was kind of parked on the dock there, and so I knew that residency was going to be very like water centered, and so I was thinking about that, and I shot a lot of footage and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but it keeps creeping up in these different ways. And so I do revisit some of that. When I did the residency in Joshua Tree at AZ West, I'm familiar with the desert because I grew up there. That site is not far from where I grew up. And, I knew that the sun was going to be one of the elements that was just going to be, beating down on us. And so I took a lot of materials that where I could make cyanotype prints, similar to the ones behind me here, and using the sun to develop these like really archaic kind of photography prints while I was out there. And so, I'll usually bring like one kind of element, or like think about one element that place has to offer, the landscape has to offer, and kind of have that, in my back pocket, but really use the time and space to think about what's there and how that place can make me think about my ideas differently. And then of course, connection to other people. I mean, that's a huge part of residencies as well, is making connections with the other residents, with the people who are running the place, and all of that.
Is there anything that you're reading, watching, looking at, artists' work who is really inspiring you? Like what's inspiring you and sort of getting you through this difficult pandemic world we live in?
I've been reading a lot of Ocean Vuong's work, poet. It's quite sad, but I do enjoy reading his work. I'm trying to get back into writing, so I think that a lot of what I'm reading is poetry right now. Tommy Fico's work also is really great. And then yeah, I mean, I just listen to a lot of music also, and so that also helps me kind of get through things and try to get moving a little bit in the studio.
We had another question pop up in the chat from Matt in the chat. How has living in the Pacific Northwest influenced your work?
I'm sure it's influenced my work a ton. One of the early opportunities I got for residency was to go to Utah for the land Center for Land Use Interpretation. And, growing up, I always wanted to just like leave the desert. And I just, it was just such a, rural, like wasteland to me in my mind, like growing up there. And when I did that residency, it was a different type of desert. It was very harsh, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I gained a new appreciation for the desert. And so I guess, the more time I spend away from the place I grew up, the more appreciation I have for the landscape itself when I go visit. I find myself like taking photos of, the epic sunsets there or what have you. There's just so much to appreciate that I didn't see, growing up, and an angsty, kid there when I was.
Yeah, where you grow up, it stays with you, doesn't it? Yes. Well, huge thanks to you, Jodie, for your generosity today. It was great to see a little bit of your practice, and we appreciate your time and energy. So thanks so much. And thanks to all of you who spent a little bit of your afternoon with us. We appreciate you. Thanks, everybody. And we hope you take good care, and we'll see you next time.